Now, if I was an unexplainable AI, I would introduce the panel we have a scientist, we have a policy person, we have an insurgent ninja, and we have a delivery warrior. But because I'm supposed to explain myself, I'll make some proper introduction. So in addition to Aki, who you've just met, we have Permen Thri Pillay, the Vice President and Partner and Public Sector Lead for Australia and New Zealand at IBM. Then we have Pia. I mean, seriously, is there anyone in this room who doesn't know Pia? Pia, Open Government and Open Data Ninja. That's what it said in the bio. Working to enable greater transparency, democratic engagement, citizen-centric design, pragmatic innovation in public sector and beyond. Then we have Charles McHardie, Chief Technology Officer at the Department of Human Services, responsible for setting the strategic and architectural direction for technology within the CIO group and to align business and ICT transformation activities. And with this, I'll stop here and pass them on to Charlie.
I've got it, have I?
You do?
Okay, all right. So freelance, no construct. Where do I start? So AI in service delivery. I think most large federal departments are looking at AI across a couple of perspectives, whether it's getting a better understanding of their extremely large data holdings. And if you look at organisations such as DHS across our large programs, such as Medicare and Centrelink, we have a huge amount of customer data on Australian citizens. Over 96% of Australians interact with us through the Medicare program, and at least at some stage in your life you will have something to do with Centrelink. So we do have a lot of customer data, and we do spend a lot of time trying to make sense of that customer data. Whether it's trying to provide some longitudinal analysis to some of the policy agencies that come to us, such as Department of Health, such as DSS, all of those are after the data that we have on Australian citizens to help them with policy decisions, whether they're getting ready for the budget each year like we're doing right now, or whether they are providing advice to Cabinet around new policies. We have a lot of data that we try and make sense of. And indeed, AI, we're just starting to dip our toes within the department into the AI space to make some sense, particularly around the National Disability Insurance Scheme that we've been working with NDIS to understand a lot of the actuarial settings that sit around the NDIS program. The other area where federal departments are looking at AI to help them is in servicing, so in servicing Australian citizens. If you look at a large federal department like DHS, our telephony queues are very busy. We have a lot of online interactions with Australian citizens, and we're always looking at ways where we can use things like virtual assistants, like tax has been quite successful with Alex, the Nuance product. And we've been working with both Microsoft and IBM looking at what virtual assistants can do for us moving forward to allow us to be able to service citizens with some of the more routine interactions that they would normally have with the department, and then allow us more time to spend with some of the more complex questions that our customers have of the department. So hopefully that's a kick-off on a large federal department / agency and what our views are initially around AI.
Thanks, Charles. From an IBM perspective and more broadly from an industry perspective, when you start to look at AI, I'll probably take the view of what does that mean for us around cognitive. Many of you would have heard Watson, and I think the question to you, Aki, earlier on is what is public sector doing about that? And there are a number of examples of where cognitive is being used in other parts of the world and starting to play in the Australian context. And when I think of cognitive, whether that is the examples that where we are working with the likes of H&R Block around providing tax advice in a different way, so taking the knowledge and the expertise that are sitting in their tax professionals' heads to service their client base in a different way. And using cognitive to support the ingestion of that knowledge, the unstructured data that they have collected over a number of years to provide better support and assistance to taxpayers in understanding their obligations. You could translate that kind of case into how that could be used, whether that would be in the context of an Australian taxation office or many other use cases. Other use cases around cognitive, the ones that are well known, has been in the area of health and oncology, where you're taking large amounts of data that may sit in medical journals that a medical professional would need to understand and consume. Now you're seeing cognitive engines ingesting that data so that you're providing, I think to your point, Aki, assistance to the professional to be able to take that information, previous diagnosis, understanding the context of the individual that's sitting in front of them to help in a diagnosis or treatment strategy. Other cognitive examples could be in what you see in the US in the insurance space. We do some work with Geico, where you're starting to do more of the virtual assist scenarios where people are phoning up either with a claim or trying to understand or move from one insurance company to the other. So some fairly taking the data, but also taking fairly simple and then over time more complex question and answers. The way in which some of that cognitive process works is not, and I'm not sure whether it's quite explainable AI, but I would suggest that it is hypothesis-based and algorithm-driven, so that you know that an answer being given to you is actually driven by the probability that something like the cognitive engine sees, so you have a greater degree of confidence that the answer presented to you is very different to how a search engine would operate, where you're just being thrown up, you've put on a word search, you're getting a whole series of information, whilst a cognitive engine is applying the algorithms, applying the hypothesis-based approach to say, with confidence, I have confidence that this is the most likely answer. And here you could also see my other options and what degree of confidence do I have that that might be the answer. And the other important element, and this is about the engagement between the individual and AI or cognitive, is the training and how do you get smarter over time. So I'll leave my comments there.
Okay, hi. I'm going to talk a little broader than AI because the context of this panel was about the future of government, the future of government service delivery, and I think AI is a part but not complete picture of that. So I guess I want to paint a bit of that picture. So the biggest problem I think that we face in government is that we don't scale. The way we've traditionally done things is small, is very linear. The more people you throw at the problem, the greater an output you get, but it doesn't exactly respond to the exponential growth in the problem space that we're all dealing with. I'm currently working in a financial sector organisation, and that problem space is only going to exponentially grow. So throwing more people doing traditional methods is only ever going to be able to go after a increasingly small proportion of that problem space. So our biggest challenge is scale, and how do we deal with that? So I guess I have three things I'd like to talk about with that. The first one, very relevant to a lot of the other talks today and to the previous comments, is about obviously data science, giving us capabilities, not just in terms of AI, but also in terms of smart people. You know, if a lot of agencies use data in very specific, targeted ways for a long time, but throwing a data science team into an agency can give a whole new perspective, give a more holistic perspective, start looking at future analysis and trends and where things could go, rather than the traditional approach of what data do we have and what insights can we get from what has, by definition, already happened in the past. So it helps with starting to do better planning into the future and starting to do some clever things about where we could go. But the other part to remember there is that we're also dealing with AI on the other side. Dealing in an intelligence agency, it's been fascinating to consider the idea that traditionally it was a person perpetrating a crime or abuse of the system, but now it could be, self-autonomous replicating companies, where a piece of software could spin up a company, transfer money in, transfer money out, make itself bankrupt, and where's the money? And do that 1,000,000 times a second kind of thing. So the future is not just about how we can cleverly apply AIs, but how we can actually recognize the use of AIs in all kinds of different ways, which may not be humans anymore. So that's the first part around data science, and the future of government around using data better, which means treating things like data, not like documents or reports or all kinds of other ways that we've traditionally seen things, which has just been based on our previous paradigm of paper. So the second one is Gov as a platform, which is one of the primary things I came to talk to you about. And this is the idea that I spent the first 8 months in the Digital Transformation Office but when it was first set up. And the team that I had there, we did a lot of amazing work around looking at what that future service delivery could look like. And leadership came in, changed direction, that's a different question, but so I won't talk about where they are now. But what we did then is we looked at what that future could look like. The realization we came to is that no agency or government is ever going to be naturally motivated to deliver outside of their mandate, outside of their budgeted work. Now, necessarily, most citizens' need to do something is necessarily going to go across agencies, is going to go across governments, and probably going to go across public and private sector if you look at the user journey holistically. And we built a all-of-government service analytics capability, first of its kind in the world, that actually saw the entire journey across governments, and that was very, very clear. So if you accept that premise, then the concept that any agency can uniquely deliver a service that transcends that issue is ludicrous, okay? So what we came up with was, well, those agencies still need to deliver their services, obviously, but can we do it in a way that then enables a multi-channel service delivery? So rather than trying to build the one thing to rule them all, we can start to build a modular design to government so that the individual agency has the first benefit, because they can now, by separating front end and back end, and I'm hoping that people in the room understand what I mean, if not, ask me the questions, you can then start to iterate your front end very quickly, because your back end is necessarily going to be a little bit slower to change because it's the big, highly secure, highly complex systems, but your front end can actually talk to those things through a programmatic layer, through an API layer. But it creates two other opportunities. Suddenly, other agencies can consume data, content, transactional services, and indeed business rules, and I'll come to that in a second, from that agency and from myriad agencies and from myriad governments to be able to build holistic services. So suddenly, for instance, if you think about it, the federal government, there's a few agencies, obviously, that deliver services, but compared to the states, the states and territory governments deliver a lot of services, a lot more than federal government. From a citizen's perspective, in terms of regularity, right, in terms of how often people are dealing with it, outside of a couple of agencies in the federal government. So why wouldn't we make it easy for the state and territory governments to consume those things, to deliver through their services, as well as, not in competition to, but as well as. The multi-channel service delivery can create then an ecosystem of service delivery where government can be in the business of doing what we do well, which is delivering the sedan service that anyone can drive, anyone can use, and it's very comfortable, but it's not the Ferrari and it's not the unicycle. Let's open that up to the marketplace. The third opportunity, of course, is that once your data content, transactional services, and business rules, I'll come back to that again, are programmatically available, suddenly, whichever way through these multi-channels the person comes to their journey, whichever way they come in, you can say, you know what, would you like, and this is your choice, user consent is critical in this, would you like us to automate the other 16 steps in your user journey? And then suddenly you have the back end being able to actually be programmatically updated. So you have a lot of opportunities when you take this modular API-driven government as a platform approach, and I believe that future of government is that people's interaction with government doesn't need to be through the government front door. It could be through any door, but that takes a modular programmatic approach to how we design our services, to how we iterate. And just on that point, one of the things we've noticed around the world, we've seen it at DTA now, and we've seen it at GDS, and we've seen it all around the world, is that if you apply user-centered design plus agile, yes, you get a better designed service today. But if you do those things without this third leg of the stool, this consumable government, governance and API model, all you're doing is you're replicating silos, okay? And that actually creates a problem for tomorrow and into the future. So the third thing I'll throw at you is government of the future, starting to look at different models of delivery. There's a lot of talk around procurement transformation at the moment. I would argue that any form of procurement change, which is just based on doing it slightly faster, better, cheaper, is actually more of an iteration than a transformation. I think there are some genuine transformative approaches to solving the problems, and I'll just talk about one, is a model of partnership. So we've identified in the agency I'm in that there are other organisations out there, government or non-government, who actually have some of the same goals as us. If we can identify some of those natural partners, we could co-design, co-resource, co-share the risk, co-implement, solutions that are of mutual benefit. Now, of course, you could never take this partnership model to implement business as usual. You're never going to be able to say, it's in your best interest to help me do my desktop sewing. However, where there is a genuinely shared problem, we have a genuine way of doing it better, at scale, and in a way that multiple partners can contribute to the problem. I can certainly give examples of that, but I think there's an opportunity for the future of government in terms of how we could partner. And the final one I want to quickly talk about is going back to those programmable business rules. If rather than us taking the rules of government, so our regulations, legislations, various codes and all of it, and what we do today is we pay a lot of money to lawyers to write into lawyer speak, and then someone at the other end, who's the regulated community or the business or the whatever, have to pay a lot of lawyers to interpret that back into some form of iteration. And it might be in their business systems, it might be in their processes, it could be in anything. I like to think of this as the old modem sort of model, right? You're basically taking digital, transforming it to analog over here, and then transforming it back to digital to apply it. What if we made the logic of government available in a programmatic form, right? A digital first form. And this has been spoken about. Our treasurer actually gave a wonderful speech talking about making regulation available as code first as the holy grail. And we completely agree. So if you make your regulation available as code, the logic behind available as code, then rather than everyone having to interpret it and take a best guess in the implementation of it, everyone has the authoritative logic available from government that can actually plug directly into its business systems. The cost of regulation would go down and compliance would go down dramatically. The cost of changing regulation goes down dramatically. Everyone keeps focusing on less or more regulation depending on your side of politics, but this is about completely changing the transformation of regulation. So there's some opportunities there. Once you have programmatic rules, you can do all kinds of clever things like what I like to call verifiable, well, not what I like to call, there's a new thing coming up, verifiable claims, that a few of you will be aware of. How many people have heard that term, verifiable claims? Not many. The rest of you should Google it. Imagine if, rather than saying you need to meet a means test to get some money from us as an agency, send us all your documentation. Send us how much money you've got in the bank, send us how many properties you've got, send us all of this documentation. And then a person or a machine is going to look at all of that and interpret it and figure out whether you meet our means test. Why wouldn't we actually make the rule programmatic, publicly available? And then you could say you could either send us all this documentation, which by the way costs us as an agency a huge amount of time and money, even if we're paying an AI to do it, to parse, and that's creating a bit of a honeypot because now we've got all this personal information. Why wouldn't we be able to say, if there's a trusted partner like a bank who can just say, do you have less than this amount? The answer can be yes or no. You don't need to know actually how much money I've got in the bank to know whether I meet the means test. You don't need to know my date of birth to know that I'm over 18. You don't need to know, the specific detail to know that I meet the condition. This conditional approach is a massive transformation for government. So I'll leave it there. There's a lot to talk about, but obviously there's other people, so I'll hand it over. 3 ideas for you. I thought that might be useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Aki, do you want to make any?
I have no more comments.
Yes, I feel that a bit speechless myself.
Okay. No, all kidding aside, I think one of the things, and I talked about it in the talk as well, is really it's actually not about the technology, and I think that's a really important. There's a thing that I like to say when I do my talks is that if you have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail.
Totally.
And as a technology research center like Park, we are very guilty of that, right? We develop a technology and then we start looking for things that can solve. And I think that's the wrong approach. And I think the discussions today have been great because it's really centered on technology, but also we're really thinking about the needs and what we're trying to solve with those things. So I'll give you an example of what we've been working on back in California. We work with the local parking officials and parking service agencies about how do you make smart parking meters, right? How do you make parking better for your citizens? And we didn't come in with all the technologies about smart iPhone apps or smart parking meter this and communication that. We actually went in with nothing and we just started riding around with people. Right? Yeah. We recruited people. Obviously, we didn't just jump into people's cars, but we recruited people, and we asked them if we could just, get a little bit of a taste of their experience parking in Palo Alto, right, or downtown San Francisco, or Oakland. And if you go onto our website, there's some really interesting videos from that. But people have all sorts of different problems with parking, right? And that's, I think, where you start with services, is you try to figure out what the problems are, and then you use technology or something else to solve it, right? It's not always about technology. And I'll give you a funny example. we notice, and I don't know what the parking situation here is in Canberra, but for example, down in San Francisco, the streets are used for different things at different times of the day, right? So at some points in the morning, you can't even stop there. At some points during the day, you can't park there. At some points, you're actually allowed to park there, right? And so they've got signs on the street that tell you what you can't do, right? No parking here, no standing here at certain times. And you've got these, there's a really funny picture of a sign that basically has like 10 different things that you cannot do. And half of them have been exposed to the sun for the last 10 years, so you can't even read what it says on there, right? So it's basically a nightmare. You can't figure out when you should be parking there or when you can be parking there. If you think about it, though, from the consumer or the driver's point of view, they don't really care when you can't park there. They care when you can park there. Now, that's a subtle difference in the way you think about things, but if you use that logic to design parking then, you wouldn't put up signs that say no parking between 9 and 12, no this or no that between these certain times. It would just tell you yes parking between 12 and 1, right? Because that's what you really want to know. So that's a subtle shift in the mindset of the way you think about things, and I think that really applies to technology as well, right? You're not kind of going in there thinking about what types of technologies, what can I solve with this technology? I have this AI, what can I do with it?
Yep.
Put that aside. What are the problems that are really trying to be solved? And then bring in something, and it's not always technology. And I think it's funny coming from somebody that works in a research center like Park, but I think if you do it long enough, you start realizing that if you start hitting everything with a hammer, then you're not really going to be creating much value.
The same as blockchain. Blockchain apparently is going to make my bed and make me toast in the morning.
Yeah.
Blockchain's very, very good at specific things, and it is a paradigm shift, but it's not everything to everyone sort of thing. It's fascinating.
Absolutely.
I mean, the comment though I would make here is that whilst blockchain isn't everything to every problem, I think what it does do is challenge what government's role is going to be.
Oh yeah.
Because it is about understanding how you are participant, how are you networked. And I think as you start thinking about the future, you've got to start understanding what government's role, not just as a regulator or as a service delivery provider is going to be. It's how are you going to play within an ecosystem? How are you going to transform not just that government organization, but that ecosystem and the experience of people within those ecosystems? How are you going to be more networked? And blockchain's one example of how you work and operate within a network.
It's part, and that's what I meant by the paradigm shift. So we've moved several paradigms that aren't in the future. They've already happened. Centrist to distributed, closed to open, and a few others. Scarcity to surplus is a good example too. I guess when I was talking about the scale problem, what I probably didn't say quite so obviously, but I'll say it now, is if government doesn't adapt to being a node in the network rather than king in the castle, it renders itself irrelevant. Let that sink.
Not to mention subject to competition.
Well, subject to competition, but that's already the case. But more the point, it starts to get routed around, right? When government gets seen as the blocker, people just route around it. Now, people in government, we tend to say, and there's a lot of people that say, oh yeah, but we have a monopoly on the service delivery or on this function or that function, fine. But people can still work around that, and they do. So really, the opportunity, if you want to see it in an opportunistic way, is that scale, being able to scale what we do by working in a partnership model, by making ourselves more plug and playable for others to be able to build on top of, by making ourselves the platform that society, industry, and all the rest of it can actually build upon. That for me is a good role for government in the future, particularly around highly trusted functions, that government is the only mechanism which is naturally motivated to do certain things, right? Because corporates are naturally motivated to do other things, and we should leverage both of those things in the right way. But the idea that you either outsource or you don't outsource is, I think, we're way beyond that, or we should be way beyond that conversation.
So as a more practical example of that, particularly with government as a platform, if you think about why most citizens interact with government departments, whether it's federal or state-based, it's due to a change in circumstance. So it's about knowing the citizen as much as possible. And if you look at a few of the DTA objectives that they are trying to push across federal government, they all make a whole pile of sense. If you look at it from an Australian citizen's perspective, light touch, so less and less interaction with the Australian citizen. We should just know it. Tell us once, so when you've told us something, you shouldn't have to tell us again. And then a large focus on straight through processing, particularly in the claims type area. So if you look at it from a practical perspective, we're looking very closely now at our claim forms, our online claim forms that we offer up to Australian citizens across the many claims that we have. So Centrelink has 38 different claims that you can put in for across the Centrelink Master Program. So we're looking at a more conversational-based approach to understanding what may have changed in your circumstance. So reaching back into the CRM system, us understanding you more in a more wholesome manner before you start filling in a claim form that may be 10 pages long. All we do is we just ask the necessary questions that we need answered to be able to fill in the fields, to make an entitlement assessment, and then pay your claim. So we've got a very big focus as part of the Whippet program, our large Centrelink transformational program, to focus a lot on customer circumstance data.
Can I make one slight, I mean, this is a conversation, it's a panel, right? It's interesting because I agree with the light touch, and I think all the research shows that people don't want to deal with government until they have to.
Yep.
But I don't think that necessarily translates to people want us to know everything about them so we can preempt. I think that, I don't know that that's actually the conclusion that the research I've seen got to, because there's multiple ways you could deal with that, right? So I think we've just got to be careful. People don't want to deal with government until they have to, until they want to. And so where we try to be too tricky about preempting things, it's scary actually. And because government is both the social worker and the cop at the broadest range. And so for a lot of people, engaging with us can feel a bit spooky. So I think we're just going to be careful to not take that too far.
Like, I'd agree with preempt, but also customers do not want to have to repeat the same information across multiple claims across government or multiple interactions with government. So,
I agree.
More sharing of data helps us to be able to pull that off.
So long as it's based on user consent, yes.
Oh yeah, so I'll make a quick intervention here. So on the issue of bureaucracy, has heard about Estonia and what wonderful things those people are doing, and their e-residency program and the data embassy and so on. But I'm not sure how many of you know that Estonia managed to get 3% more companies enrolled in Estonia because those companies have access to the European Union single marketplace, and because it is much easier to set up a company in Estonia compared with Austria, Germany, or Belgium. So when we're talking about essentially who is the competition to the government, in some cases it may be private sector, in some cases it may be not-for-profit, in some other cases it may be new governments or other governments. And this is something we have to keep in mind. And probably one salient point out of the entire conversation has been this idea of the importance of changing the mindset and asking the question in a different way. Right. Now, I feel extremely guilty because we have 2 minutes before we wrap up, and there have been no questions from the audience. So can I indulge in an extra 5 minutes for this? And let's ask a couple of questions.
A couple of questions, if that's okay. The last one. Thanks. A question around the role of AI and data-driven approaches in service delivery. Thank you. You spoke about that. Most of the big decisions in government in terms of sustainability are on the policy side. So the interrelationship between a service delivery agency like DHS, the massive amounts of data and insights that it has in its service delivery function, and how that gets fed to the policy agencies. And I mean, DHS supports over 30 policy agencies. So just that interrelationship between data and policy, improved policy design.
What's the question though?
Just what are your thoughts about whether we're doing enough to bring it back to the policy design sphere?
Yeah, so if you look at the way we are set up at the moment, we have a very large enterprise data warehouse, which we park a lot of data in, and we've got, so Centrelink Master Program, we've got 30 years of data that sit in there across Australian citizens. One of the big things we're focused on now is better agility for answering those questions. So we deal with ministerial questions just about every day. We deal with questions from the policy agencies every day as they're trying to get their policy settings right. I would say that we've focused traditionally on those regular questions that we get asked, And now we're trying to get a lot more agile and get decent business insights out of those data holdings that we have. So technology is helping us there. We're working heavily on a Hadoop data lake at the moment, which will allow us to overlay a larger set of tools over the top of those data holdings and be more agile. So I would say probably the newer focus that we've got is more agility in understanding that data and answering more complex queries that we get to reduce some of the frustration that you may get from some of those policy agencies. Yep.
Maybe another slightly different lens to that is as you start to use technology or different approaches like straight-through processing, I think from a linkage between service delivery and policy, it's about understanding, where's the burden of compliance going to be? And if you can start to change the money toward the more, those with the multiple and cumulative disadvantage, and that's where you're going to spend your most expensive resources to serve, then, and the other simpler in a more technology-driven, light touch way, and it's mostly those people who don't want to necessarily have to engage with you, then I think that will drive a better policy outcome. And I think the concept of how do we understand how robust our social safety net is and how sustainable it's going to be over time, we're going to have to find different ways in which to do so.
Now, I'm getting some death stares, so unfortunately, that pretty much means it's time to wrap up this conversation. So please join me in thanking the panel.